I'm Frank Garza, and welcome to Here and Abroad, a podcast that follows the U.S. men's national team and their player pool across Europe, MLS, or wherever else they play their club football. The USMNT has two big friendlies coming up. They play Germany this Saturday afternoon, October 14th, and then Ghana on the following Tuesday night. On today's show, we're going to preview these two matches and talk about what we'll be watching for when they get underway. And to help me do that, I've invited Ryan Tolmich to join the show. Ryan is the American soccer correspondent for Goal. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Frank. Appreciate you having me. Obviously, there's a lot to talk about going into these two games. A lot happening all through the U.S. men's national team. So, yeah, excited to dive into it and discuss some of the fun things going on.
Yeah, these are, the Germany game especially, I've had marked on my calendar. And Ghana's a big game too, but I've been so looking forward to these games. So I'm glad the moment is finally upon us. Let's start with that Germany game. Okay, it's Saturday afternoon. It's about 1 hour before the kickoff. You see those lineups get announced. When you take a look at those, what are you going to be looking for?
We'll start with the obvious one. Is just what does the midfield look like, and does it have Gio Reyna in it? I think there's going to be a big minutes restriction on Gio during this camp. Greg Berhalter already said that he's going to be looking to ease him in the way that he did with Flo Balogun last camp, where you give him maybe a half here, a half there to kind of get his legs under him just because he hasn't played much. But when you look at the U.S. midfield, what's it going to look like? You have no Tyler Adams, so that messes with your ability to have a number 6. And you have a limited Gio Reyna and no Malik Tillman, which messes with your ability to have a number 10 in a way. So how do you kind of line this midfield up? Do you have, the way Greg Berhalter has kind of always had it with a number 6 and then 2 number 8s? Or do you have, 2 deep lying midfielders and a number 10? So that's kind of the big one here, just because it's going to be a big talking point throughout this cycle is, do they keep the MMA midfield of Musa McKennie Adams for another cycle? Or does someone like Reyna or Tillman kind of slot in as a more attacking presence? Now, it doesn't have to be a concrete answer necessarily. It could be one that depends on opponents or situations or availability or everything like that. But in this Germany game, I think it'll be interesting to see how the U.S. lines up and how they kind of approach playing a team of that caliber.
And I should mention, you mentioned Tillman. He was a late scratch of the roster due to injury, so we got to remember that. I'm really disappointed because I was looking forward to seeing him maybe slot in there after. I was thinking maybe Gio takes 45 minutes and then, maybe Tillman comes in at the number 10 if that's how Berhalter arranges it. But I agree. That's kind of the first thing I'm going to be looking for. And I think because of the quality of the opponent, I don't think there's going to be much, quote unquote, like experimentation going on. I think he's going to put out the midfield that he thinks 100% he feels gives us the best chance to win. And, maybe he'll be a little bit more conservative than he normally would. I mean, how would you like to see them line up?
Yeah, I think you hit it there, and just saying that this is more than a friendly for the U.S. in a way, and that they do want to win this game. It's clear that a lot of the players and those within the program see this game as a real kind of benchmark, especially on the way to the Copa America and ultimately to the World Cup. And there aren't that many benchmarks like this on the road to that World Cup, just because of the way the scheduling works with the U.S. already being qualified. So there's only so many games where they can get, a quote-unquote competitive atmosphere like this. So I think everyone wants to show well for themselves in this Germany game, just because it does feel like a special sort of circumstance. So it'll be interesting to see how the U.S. approaches it, but also how Germany approaches it. Obviously, it's a different sort of camp for them, being that they're under a new coach and Nagelsmann. They have a whole lot of upheaval going on. So it'll be interesting to see how they sort of approach that. But in terms of the U.S., when you look at the team, I think you have to expect something close to a first choice lineup, as close as you can get. Obviously, there's people missing. There's no Tyler Adams. There's no Anthony Robinson. So there's definitely some holes to be filled in there. But I don't think you're going to see as much fun as it would be to see someone like maybe like Leonard Maloney thrown in for his first cap. I think it'd be a pretty big ask to throw him in there for a first cap against Germany. So I think you're going to see a lot of familiar faces in this game, at least at the start, just to kind of get some sort of impression together of what this team looks like when they're playing a team that could really play with them, because it's not really something we saw during the last camp, and maybe not something we really saw since the World Cup. It's been pretty tough every time the full team has really been together. They've kind of had their way with everyone in their way. You know, looking back to Canada and in Mexico in the Nations League, they really kind of handled those games most of the way. So it'll be interesting to see a team that could play with the U.S. and how the U.S. kind of handles a team that can go at them like that.
And specifically with regards to the midfield, how would you like to see that midfield lined up? What would be your preference?
I mean, it like we said, the Gio thing, if we just assume he's going to get 45 minutes, we'll say we could use that as a benchmark. In an ideal world, I think I'd like to see that 45 minutes in the first half where you get the most of the A team there, you get fresh legs, you get, in theory, what should be a pretty decent Germany team out there. I don't know how Nagelsmann's going to line up his first lineup and how he's going to rotate, but you would get something resembling what this team could look like at full strength. I think that would be an ideal scenario rather than throwing him in there in the second half against tired legs and maybe seeing, you know, a little bit of an easier game for him. Now, the thing that complicates that is it's still up in the air how fit Gio is exactly, just because we've only seen him play, you know, a couple minutes on the club level. But in an ideal world, if Gio is exactly 45 minutes fit, it would be fun to see him in those first 45 if he could. And other than that, you know, you want to see just like the A-team players and see how they handle it. I want to see what Flo Balogun looks like against, you know, top-level center backs. You know, I want to see how Christian Pulisic could bring his form over into national team camp, because it's so often been the opposite with him, where he takes good national team form into the club level. Now he's bringing good club form to the national team level. What does that all look like? What does the center back pool look like? There's really like 5, 6, 7, 8 guys battling for that spot right now, and some guys left off this roster that could still play a part. So what does that look like? There's a lot of questions, but there's a lot of guys in the pool that are playing at a high level, and I think that's what makes it so exciting, is that while it used to be a struggle to fill holes, now it seems like there's a couple guys at every position that can make an impact. So it'll be fun to see who those guys are against an opponent like Germany.
Yeah. You mentioned center back, which is one of the positions I'm most intrigued with. You know, I think when it comes to the lead up to the Copa America and the next World Cup, obviously, when I think about what we still need to learn about this team and building this team, it's mostly around depth. I think a lot of the starters maybe are pretty entrenched, but center back is one of those positions I think is completely wide open, even the starting two. And there's probably 4, 5, 6 guys that are in the running, you know, for that. I think this is the first look we're going to have on who Greg Berhalter thinks is his top 2 since all the way back at the World Cup against the Netherlands. And so I'm real curious to see which 2 he rolls out there. Do you have any preference for which 2 you think should be out there against Germany?
Yeah, like you said, it's tough just because when you look at the 4 guys that are in this camp, they all have a pretty strong case to be in that lineup. You know, Tim Ream is the veteran guy who has been so solid, you know, dating back to the World Cup. Miles Robinson would have probably been the guy at the World Cup if he was healthy. You know, he was very much like on that path. Chris Richards is the guy who's been with the national team, you know, when he has been in those moments, has stepped up and has had some fantastic games, even if they haven't necessarily translated to the club level. And Cameron Carter-Vickers, when you look at what he's been able to do with Celtic, what he has done when he's been on the field with the U.S., like he's made his case too. And that's not even getting into guys like Walker Zimmerman, getting into guys like, you know, Berhalter name-checked John Brooks the other day on his media call, which was a little surprise given how long he's been out of the national team. But there's just so many guys. For me, I think you have to keep giving Chris Richards looks, just because I'm very much a believer that he is the future at that position. I have a lot of Chris Richards stock built up right now. I think he is a player that can play at a high level and will at some point. Obviously, center back's a tough position to break through, especially in the Premier League when you're a young center back. So it makes sense that it's taking a little bit of time. But yeah, I think Chris Richards needs to get a look. And then when you look at his partner, you know, do you want to go with the steadiness of Ream against Germany just to kind of have a veteran presence out there to lead the line against what should be a good German team? I think those are the 2 that I would go with if I was to pick, but you can make an argument for any of them. And I don't think anyone should be too surprised if it goes with any number of these pairings.
Yeah, I'm with you. If I was a betting man, I think I would say Richards and Ream. I wouldn't be shocked if Miles Robinson was out there instead of Ream. I think Richards is the one I'm most confident in who will be out there. I mean, he started the last 2 matches in the previous window. Cameron Carter-Vickers, I think because maybe he's
Yeah,
coming back from
he's just
injury.
coming
Yeah,
back. So.
he may be limited on minutes, but that'll be real interesting to see. And then the other kind of starting spot I'll be looking for in that lineup is the outside backs. Okay, so we got Serginho Dest, DeJuan Jones, Joe Scally, and Christopher Lund on the roster. Anthony Robinson, of course, is out. And so I'm real curious to see, okay, is Greg going to start one of these more natural left backs, DeJuan Jones, Christopher Lund, and give them an opportunity? Or is he going to say, well, I know Joe Scally and Serginho Dest can play left or right, so I'm going to just stick with these guys that have more experience. I mean, what's your feel on which direction he might go there, or which direction you think he should go?
Yeah, like you said, it's a tricky one, just because throughout the last cycle, due to the lack of left backup to Robinson, you so often saw just Serginho Dest tossed out there, and you called it a day. But now you're starting to see a few guys come through, namely these two guys with Lund and DeJuan Jones. I personally, like, if I was in charge of everything, I'd like to see Lund get a chance, just because he is such a mystery right now to the U.S. and that he is so new. He looked solid in his debut camp. You saw the vision with him. You saw what he does. He gets forward. He adds a presence on going from end line to end line. He's not going to be like the guy like Serginho Dest who's going to tuck in and create necessarily. He's the guy who's going to kind of get up and down and add some width and stretch the defense, which is solid on that side, assuming Christian Pulisic plays out there, because if he cuts in, you have another guy out there that's going to be stretching the back line. So, I'd like to see what he can do against a higher level opponent. It is going to be a big ask to just kind of chuck him out there against Germany and one of his first few caps, but it's one of those things where you just kind of throw a player into deep water and see what happens. But yeah, I would like to see Lund or Jones, just because you want to learn more about them. We have plenty of data on what Serginho Dest looks like. Joe Scally definitely deserves more opportunities, but it'd be nice to see him get more opportunities, at right back, if that's going to be where he's going to play. So yeah, let's give like the actual left backs a go this window and see what you have in those guys, just because you're going to only have so many chances to see it on the way to the Copa America.
Yeah, I'm with you. My guess is it'll be Lund. It seems like he's a little higher in the pecking order right now than DeJuan Jones. But for either of them, I mean, what an opportunity it would be if they go out there and have a good game. They can really kind of solidify their roster spot going forward if they're able to do that. On the other hand,
it's not even just roster spots, though. Is that the other aspect of this that's kind of in the background that's so interesting, is that this is one of those games that like can earn you a transfer if you play well enough, especially for some of these younger guys. Like, that there's going to be some Bundesliga teams watching this game. So if you're one of those younger guys that could maybe use a step up the ladder, like this wouldn't be a bad game to show out in. Like you said, just because you know that there's going to be some eyes on it. So it's one of those games that can improve a player's status with the national team, but also its status, on the club level if they catch someone's eye in the right way.
That's true. I think just the other day I was reading about DeJuan Jones was getting some interest from potentially some Bundesliga teams. So that's a great point. Well, let's fast forward to, okay, the lineups have come out, the match has gotten underway. What are you going to be looking for there in terms of, I don't know, maybe some tactics you'll be watching for, certain players you want to keep an eye on? I mean, what are you going to be watching for when this match gets underway?
So I think the most interesting thing about this game is just how it is played, just because we've gotten so many data points of the U.S. and how they play when they are the A side of the game, when they are the team that has the ball, when they are the team that's largely in control, not necessarily even having the ball, but in control of the pace, when they're dictating what the game kind of looks like. And since the World Cup, we haven't really had a game where you get a look at the U.S. where they're on the back foot. They got obviously a glimpse of that at the World Cup. The Wales game, they were dominating most of the game, the Iran game, but England game and the Netherlands game, like, that's what's going to happen in these big games, where the other team's going to dictate the play. The other team's going to have the game played on their terms, whether they're sitting back and countering or whether they're bossing the ball. So how does the U.S. seize back control of a game like that? And obviously it's tough in a friendly against a Germany team under a new coach that's going to be kind of identifying their own style of play. But you just want to see how the U.S. handles the game and how it is played. are they able to play the game on their terms, whatever tactics that is? Are they able to make Germany uncomfortable in any way and challenge Germany? So yeah, it's not necessarily like these little micro battles, although that is important, but the macro is how do they handle the bigger picture of playing a team at this level, just because like in theory next summer that's what's going to happen when you play in Argentina or Brazil in a Copa America. They're going to dictate the game. How do you respond to it? How do you handle it? And how do you kind of seize moments where you can kind of take control yourself? So yeah, that's what I want to see, is just whatever the tactics are, whatever the strategy is, can I look at this game and say like, all right, the US had moments where they were kind of handling things here. So yeah, that's kind of all we're going to be looking for, just because the personnel will change, some of the things will change, the tactics will change, but how they kind of handle that moment is going to be a big answer for everything on the road to next summer and then the summers beyond.
Yeah, and I think you touched on that's what I'm most interested in seeing too. I mean, namely, like how aggressive are they, and how much do they try and impose their style on Germany versus kind of sitting back? I mean, when I think back to that Netherlands game, it seemed like they were aggressive and tried to impose their style in Netherlands, and a lot of people afterwards kind of like chastised them for it, saying, yeah, that's what they wanted you to do. They were waiting for you on the counterattack, and that's where you played right into their hands. You were too aggressive maybe. And so I'm wondering, are they just going to go for it? Do they learn from that Netherlands game and maybe take, I don't know, a little bit more cautious approach, or have a little bit more of a, I don't know, for lack of a term, safety system in place for just in case like things go wrong? It's gonna be super interesting. And can they impose like their style of play against Germany? I think, yeah, we're to the point now where we want this program to go. It's like it's not enough to be like, hey, man, we played a good match against Germany. That's a good thing for the U.S. I mean, it's like if we're gonna progress, we have to start winning these matches and being able to like impose our style. And I don't know. You never know until you get into these big games like the ones against Germany.
The one thing is that, historically, like this program has always gotten up for these games dating back, 20, 25 years. These games have always been moments where the U.S. team has stepped up. I think back to like Bobby Wood just like absolutely lighting up top teams under Jurgen Klinsmann. When these games do roll around, especially these friendlies, the U.S. is always up for them. The mentality is always the right way, but they haven't necessarily, like we said, been the team that has been the A side, the dominant side in those games. And I'm not necessarily saying they're going to be against Germany, but can we see something a little bit more than what we have in the past? Obviously, winning is the goal, so, try and win by any means necessary, but there's also something to be said about, like we said, doing it on your terms and doing it in a different way. So, yeah, can they make Germany uncomfortable? Can they put them on the back foot? Can they make life hard for Germany's attack? Can they maybe go out and, the midfield battle is going to be tough given the absences, but can they win the midfield battle? There's just so many different little interesting battles that'll come from this game. But yeah, it should be a fun one and a good measuring stick for all these different units and different players.
Let's talk about Germany a little bit and how the U.S. matches up with them. I mean, we're catching Germany at a good time where they seem to be a little bit down right now. I mean, if you look at Germany right now, they're in the FIFA rankings, they're number 15, ELO ratings number 13. Last World Cup, they did not make it out of the group stage. Since the World Cup, they've played 7 matches, 2 wins, 4 losses, 1 tie. Their coach was recently fired, Julian Nagelsmann. This is going to be his first match with the team. I mean, what do you know about Germany's squad, and how do you think the U.S. matches up with them?
Yeah, so I think, like you said, this is a really interesting time to catch Germany, just because theoretically they do feel like a team that's pressing the reset button. But then you also look at their last window, and they got the snot beat out of them by Japan, which, like, realistically, no shame in that. Japan is a really, really good team. But then they came out and just beat France, and that's, whether it's a friendly, whatever the situation is, France is so loaded that beating them is an accomplishment no matter who you are at this point. So, yeah, Germany's a team. They've just got, look, you know what you're going to get with them. They've got so much talent. All these players that play in the Bundesliga, the Premier League, La Liga, like wherever all these guys are, there's so much talent in this team, and it's a mix of young and old. When you look at the squad, like you see all the familiar names that you've kind of been watching for years. You see, Thomas Muller in there. You see Antonio Rudiger, you see, Ter Stegen, Mats Hummels, like all these big name guys. But then you also see the next generation coming up, and Florian Wirtz and Jamal Musiala. Like they have these attacking midfielders that are just so dynamic. You see a guy like Kai Havertz, who is obviously a familiar face, but is still only 24 and still kind of figuring his whole life out over there. So yeah, it's a team that's very much in transition, but also a team that just has so much depth in different age ranges that they can kind of handle that transition a little bit differently than, say, the U.S. did a few years ago, where they pressed total reset and just started with a bunch of 19 and 20-year-old kids and figured it out from there. This is a more soft transition under a new coach. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what type of lineup Nagelsmann goes with in this first game. Does he trend young? Does he give some of these younger options a chance? You're looking at the squad. There's a couple guys in here for their first caps or their early caps. Do those guys get a look out in this game, and how much does he kind of rely on the veterans to kind of set a tone early? The pressure's going to be on to get wins in these first few camps for them. They're not going to be patient necessarily. So there's going to be pressure for them to go out and try and win this game, just to kind of set a tone for what this national team is going to look like heading towards the Euros. So what does that kind of look like, and how quickly do they kind of transition towards some of these younger players as some of these older players phase out after the World Cup and heading towards the Euros?
Okay, so we spent most of the podcast talking about Germany, but the U.S. has another opponent right after that, Ghana. When you look at that Ghana match, is there anything unique to that match you'll be looking out for in terms of like how the USMNT plays relative to the Germany game, or is it just more of the same?
No, I think it's a very different type of game. When I first looked at it, my first thought was like, oh, nice, another rivalry game against Ghana. And then, I looked at the U.S. roster and I was just like, yeah, absolutely none of these guys have been a part of that. There has been so much changeover from that last World Cup game against Ghana that it is a very different looking player pool. So I got that out of my mind really quickly, and I think I realized the thing that I'm most interested in this game, and it kind of goes back to the point I was making about the Germany game, in that we've seen a lot of games where the U.S. is the dominant team. We've seen games where they are the underdog team, but necessarily we haven't seen as many games of where they're going to be playing a team that's like very much on a similar talent level to them. And that's what you're going to kind of get against Ghana, and that you look at their team and you see familiar faces. You see guys that play in the Premier League, every week. You see guys that are playing at a very similar level to a lot of these U.S. teams. Inaki Williams is a La Liga starter. Jordan Ayew's been in the Premier League forever. Kudus plays for West Ham. Thomas Partey plays for Arsenal. Like, these are guys who are playing at big clubs in the same way that Christian Pulisic plays for AC Milan, and Weston McKennie plays for Juventus. Like, these are all guys who are playing at a high level. So it'll be interesting to see what that looks like, just because it seems like this is a little bit more evenly matched. You could argue that the U.S. has more talent, surely, but it's definitely close. So when you look at that, I want to see, when you have two teams who are kind of on the same page in terms of where they are, how can the U.S. kind of take that little edge and become the top team in the game? How can they assert themselves against a team where the talent is pretty even? When you look at, like we said, the Netherlands game, it was always going to be kind of on the Netherlands. They're going to kind of dictate what they want to do. In this game, who's going to be able to dictate what they want to do? So, yeah, I think that's what's going to be the interesting thing, is how do you kind of match up against a team where it should be relatively even, and it should be a relatively good matchup for everybody in there.
Yeah, I mean, we've had some epic battles against Ghana, in previous World Cups. They should have brought John Brooks in just for that. Yep. Maybe he could get his header against them, where he scored the goal against Ghana in, what was that, the 2014 World Cup? I mean, that's one of my favorite USMNT moments. I always remember where I was when I was watching that match. But yeah, I was a little surprised actually when I was looking at these rankings. I know the rankings, say what you will about them, how accurate they are, but Ghana's number 60 in the FIFA rankings, number 63 in the ELO ratings. A little bit surprised at how low they were, because this is a good team. They didn't make it out of their World Cup group stage, but they had a good showing at the World Cup, nonetheless. One thing that intrigues me is that they were the youngest team at the 2022 World Cup. There's a lot of talk about this U.S. team and how young they were, but I think once we added Tim Ream to our roster, that bumped our age up a little bit, and Ghana became the youngest team, and then the U.S. was the second youngest team. And so these are two really young teams. Yeah, it's just going to be interesting to see who can impose their will, on each other. And the U.S. has had a lot of problems with Ghana in the past. So this one's going to be real fun to watch. Kind of as we wrap up here, I just want to get a feel from you in terms of like what your expectations are result-wise. I mean, like after these two matches are done with, when you look back on this window, what will good look like for you?
Ooh, yeah, that's a tough one just because at the end of the day, they are still friendlies. And while everyone may start a friendly with the best intentions, like things kind of change depending on what happens. You could look at a game where you get 45 minutes of two teams like really going at it, and then subs come in at halftime and kind of take the edge out of the game a little bit because the talent level drops off. So it's so tough to like project necessarily what a good result would look like. Does a 1-0 loss to a Germany team that plays their A team the whole game look better than a 2-1 win against a heavily rotated Germany? Like, I don't know. Like, that's a tough kind of question to answer. But yeah, I think what you're looking for is, I think you do want at least one result from these two games, just because you want to be able to point to something and be like, hey, we did what we had to do in that game to get out. Because this is a team that at this point still needs to learn how to kind of win these games. We know that they can win against teams that are less talented than them, but we still need to see them win against teams that are of the same talent or more. There's only so many Canada-Mexico games, and that was a good data point, seeing them win those Nations League games. But we need to see more of it against teams that play different styles, that play at a different level, that have different sorts of players with different experiences. So yeah, I think you do want, at least it would be great to get one win in these games, just so you could point to the break as, hey, look, we learned something here. We proved that we could do this and that. But yeah, realistically, a lot of it's going to be focusing on what individual players can do and what this team collectively could do over stretches to kind of show that they've improved from the team that, like we said, kind of fell into the Netherlands' hands basically a year ago. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they handle things a little bit differently this time around.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for joining me. Before I let you go, first of all, please let people know where they can go if they want to see more of your work. And also, please feel free to share any final thoughts you have about these two matches or anything USMNT related.
Yeah, to follow more of what's going on, please, come check out Goal. We got a whole lot going on in terms of just American soccer in general. So yeah, please come check that out. And yeah, I think I was talking to you right before we actually started here about how it's just been such an exciting time for American soccer over the last, 6 months, and kind of looking ahead. And it doesn't feel like it's slowing down at all. You look at where we are in terms of the men's national team building towards the Copa America, the women's national team fresh off a World Cup, new start heading into an Olympics. You got Messi going at MLS. You have, the U23s heading to the Olympics. It's just a big chaotic time in American soccer. So yeah, it's very fun to kind of be following it all and sitting down and discussing it with you and kind of talking through all these different fun things that we're getting to do. So yeah, this should be a fun break. Should be a good time. It should be a good test for this national team. And yeah, it's just another step in this crazy little road we're all kind of following as we march towards next summer and then ultimately the World Cup. So yeah, a lot more big games to come, and it's good to have these ones to really set us up for what's going on in the next few years.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And thanks to everyone for listening to Here and Abroad. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with a fellow USMNT fan. I'm Frank Garza. You can follow me on Twitter/X at FrankGarza007, and I'll be back next week with a new episode.